Hello, I'm Kim Munson of The Kim Munson Show, where we search for truth and clarity by looking at these issues through the lens of freedom versus force, force versus freedom. In my political conversations, few can be as confusing and polarizing as the issue of climate change. Ask the average person what it is and how they feel about it, and you're bound to get a wide variety of answers. You've probably heard this statistic that 97% of scientists agree on climate change, specifically when it comes to human involvement in its creation. Well, then who wants to be on the wrong side of that equation? And why has it become political? Shouldn't we all be able to examine the scientific evidence and all draw the same conclusions, regardless of what candidate you support in an election? I would say that the majority of us agree that we don't want a waste-filled planet that has become inhospitable to life as a result of our activity as human beings. So as the planet changes, as we're able to record its fluctuations in climate, temperature, CO2 content, and so forth, what does it mean? Are the consequences of our actions bringing a coming planetary apocalypse? And if this is the case, what measures, however extreme, have to be taken to prevent this inevitable extinction? These are the questions I have, and I want answers if there are answers to be had. I want answers that are science-based and not subject to political interests. So that's what we intend to do. Today, we're seeking the honest, unfiltered truth when it comes to the climate of our planet.
Yeah, let me just... I'll have to call you back. I'm in a documentary.
I'd like to introduce Gregory Wrightstone. Gregory Wrightstone is a geologist with more than 35 years of experience researching and studying various aspects of the Earth's processes. He was recently accepted as an expert reviewer for the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. If anyone is poised to tackle our most pressing questions, he's definitely on the list.
I started getting into climate change several years ago, and as I started researching it, because I got into it because I knew that some of what we were being told was just incorrect. The science, the facts, and the data just were opposite of what we're being told.
Marker.
Give me some break. I talk to rocks. I don't talk to people.
I'd also like to introduce Walt Johnson. Walt is a career geophysicist and independent geological consultant who can also lend a concrete scientific perspective to our conversation today.
I work for no publicly traded companies. I have no dog in the fight here, shall we say. As Paul Harvey would say, you're going to get the rest of the story today.
So let's start from the basics. When I think of climate change, global warming is what comes to mind first. It's so prevalent that most people use the terms global warming and climate change interchangeably. So let's address this first. Is the planet warming? And should this be the primary reason for us to be concerned about our future?
The words they use again are unusual and unprecedented. Is our temperatures today? They're saying, well, our temperatures are hotter than they've been forever or on record. Well, if your record only goes back 150 years, that would be correct. Because we are in a warming trend, but that warming trend started more than 300 years ago. It was in the depths of what was called the Little Ice Age, probably the coldest period of the last 10,000 years.
Whoa, hold on a second. Is he saying that the Earth has actually been warmer in the past than it was today? As a healthy skeptic, when someone puts a graph like this in front of me, my first thought is, where in the world are you getting this data? How are you able to tell me that you know exactly what the temperature was thousands of years ago?
When we look through geologic time over the last 10,000 years, we've got some pretty good records using what are called proxy data.
Okay, let's stop again. Proxy data. If we're really going to go down this rabbit hole of climate change, let's not make any assumptions about what we're being told. So what in the world is proxy data? After some research, it turns out proxy data is a widely accepted scientific method of using preserved physical characteristics of the environment that can stand in for direct measurements. In fact, you've probably run into this before.
When someone references the rings of a tree trunk to predict its age, they are using the proxy data of the tree's rings to do so. As human beings, we've only been directly recording temperature for a small amount of time, so it makes sense that to reach further back into the past, we rely on proxy data to do so.
That data goes back 800,000, nearly 1 million years. It's ice core data from Antarctica. And they can actually sample bubbles that were captured within the ice. For longer term data, millions of years, it's sea sediment data and rock data where they can take, they use what's called proxies to estimate that.
Okay, that's starting to make sense, and sorry for the interruption. Let's get back to our warming temperatures.
We have been here for a long time, and throughout history, we have adapted. And we did better when it was warmer. When you look at detail on the cyclical nature of things, we're in an optimum.
Before climate science became politicized, these were called climate optima. And they were called climate optima for a very good reason. Humanity flourished. Food was abundant. During the last period, it was called the medieval warm period that went from about the year 850 to 1250. It was called the High Middle Ages. At the time of Magna Carta, great cathedrals were built. People thrived and prospered. And it started going bad when it started getting cold. The previous warming period before that was called the Roman warm period. It was the time of Christ. It correlated to the Iron Age. Again, a time of great civilizations and empires that rose up. We know it was much warmer because the Romans were growing citrus in the north of England near Hadrian's Wall. Well, you can't do that today. The first great civilizations grew up during a time called the Minoan warm period. It was known as the Bronze Age. And again, life was good. All these great civilizations prospered and thrived, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. We're being told if we go to those temperatures like they experienced during the Minoan, the Roman, and the medieval warm period, it will be horrific. History doesn't tell us that. We need to go back and take a look at what happened in human history to find that these previous warm periods were hugely beneficial. Again, by almost every metric we look at, we see benefits to Earth's ecosystems and to the human condition.
What is real people?
We should celebrate the warming, celebrate the increasing carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Again, by almost every metric we look at, we see benefits to Earth's ecosystems and to the human condition.
How can that be? The Earth is thriving? That seems pretty far-fetched. And something Greg said leads me to my next question, which is carbon dioxide or CO2. This is the big one. It makes sense. If we as humans are outputting more CO2 in the atmosphere, and the CO2 is causing the warming of our planet, doesn't it make sense that this man-made change will stress our planet beyond what it can naturally handle? So where does CO2 fit into this whole picture of climate change?
One of the biggest things we're being told is that CO2, carbon dioxide, is at extraordinarily high levels. And it is true if you only look over the last 150, 200 years, that's true. Looking at it as I do as a geologist, I look into geologic time, and I find that our levels of carbon dioxide, it's 1/6 of what the average carbon dioxide levels are throughout Earth's history.
The temperature of the Earth for the past 4.5 billion years. That's a long time. And if you look on the lower right-hand side, one of those plots is carbon dioxide, that's the purple one. The blue one is the temperature. And notice the carbon dioxide, you see the little blip up on it. That's what we're so worried about right now, that the world is going to fall apart.
Okay, I'm learning the ppm, or parts per million measurement of CO2 is important to understand where we currently are in CO2 levels on Earth. We currently sit a little over 400 ppm, and it's currently being touted by many mainstream sources as a dangerous level. And it makes sense, according to the charts they use. We are at an alarming level of CO2 concentration when compared to the last 800,000 years or so. But compared to the total history of the Earth, it doesn't look near as ominous. So that leaves us with the question, What is a dangerous level of CO2?
So OSHA sets levels of dangers, I believe, starting at 8,000 parts per million for human health. And our research at the CO2 Coalition and our agronomists tell us that we'll see major benefits of CO2 for plant growth. It'll probably peak around 1,200 parts per million, or 3 times what it is today. The carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere, rather than being at levels that are much too high, we're at actually historically low levels. At the end of the last ice age, we know that carbon dioxide levels plummeted to near what I call the line of death. They got to 182 parts per million. And the line of death is at 150 parts per million. And why is that dangerous? Because below 150 parts per million, plant life cannot survive. We nearly got there. That would be a true climate catastrophe. The fact of the matter is, we need more CO2, not less. As we increase CO2, plants need less water to survive. And because of increasing carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere, we're seeing just crop growth breaking records year after year. According to NASA satellite data, more than 50% of the Earth has an increase, they call it greening, it's an increase in vegetation. And what we're seeing here, again, almost by every metric we look at, we see benefits to humanity. CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and because it is, increasing amounts will warm the atmosphere. But our experts tell us it's significantly less than predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the warming effect that we see from a doubling of CO2 is probably 0.8 of a degree. Again, nothing alarming.
Nothing alarming? I thought that these small fluctuations in temperature are exactly what are leading to all the catastrophic weather events we continually see in the news. And what's more, they seem to be getting worse. Or are they?
We're also being told that droughts are increasing, forest fires are increasing, all these calamities are getting worse. And if you go and actually look at the data, you'll find that that's just categorically false. It was all over the news that hurricanes are increasing. We have a very, very good record back to the year 1850 on the number of landfalling hurricanes in the United States. And what do we find? They're in decline, and a significant decline.
Increase in hurricane activity is part of the climate change argument. But you look at that graph is of the major hurricanes globally, the top line is of those that are 64 knots. The bottom line is those that are 96 knots or more. You see no increase in the number of hurricanes or the frequency of big hurricanes. There's no relation at all that you can find to climate change.
This is stunning. So where is the data showing that hurricanes are increasing? Here's another piece of data supplied by Mr. Wrightstone. The trend was used by the National Climate Assessment in 2014 to show the increase in hurricanes since 1980. Looks convincing. The problem becomes apparent if we take the same data they use and pull back to its origin of record in 1920. It's hard to draw the same conclusion once we see the big picture.
You are watching A Climate Conversation. To order your DVD and Blu-ray copy and watch the full-length version of this film, visit aclimateconversation.com. It's here you can share, follow, and contribute to future projects like this one.
We're told that the wildfires are increasing as a result of climate change. And every time there's a fire on television, we're told that.
If you go to the National Interagency Fire Center, which is where you go to look for all things fire in the United States, you'll see a chart there that starts in 1983 showing an astronomical increase in fires. It's just horrific. It looks bad. But they have data going to 1928. And there's been just a significant decline of both number of fires and the area burned in the lower 48 in the United States.
In the 80s and 70s, we had an environmental movement. You'll have to think back to remember it, where people were chaining themselves to the trees. They put spikes in the trees and the sawmills would blow up, and everyone said we should quit harvesting the forest. That chart is misleading because it shows changes more in the social values than actual things resulting from climate change.
When they stopped logging and timbering in the national forests, in the 1980s, they used to be able to go out the logging roads. If there was a fire that cropped up, they could drive their equipment right to the fire and put it out. Now those logging roads have all grown up. They can't access it. And so now we've got way too many trees, no way to get in to access a fire when it erupts unless they're airdropping people in. All these things are compounding the fire risk. So a lot of what's going wrong there is our fault because we're not managing our forest correctly.
Perhaps we can't draw a direct comparison from hurricanes or forest fires to climate change or specifically global warming. But there is an image that sticks out in my mind. The polar ice caps. The imagery of consistent receding glaciers has been all too familiar and seems to be a common rallying point for predicting doom for our planet. So what happens if and when all this ice melts?
One of the doomsday scenarios that's often advanced is the melting of the polar ice cap. The fact of the matter is you could melt the entire polar ice cap and it would have scarcely any effect at all on sea level rise. And you go, what? Why is that? Well, you can do this experiment at home, put some ice cubes in a glass, mark the level of the water. When the ice cubes melt, the water level remains the same. And that's because the northern polar ice cap is floating in the Bering Sea on water. Sea level rise is driven by land-based glaciers. We know that in the recent period, the glacial retreat and sea level rise went hand in hand, and both of those started in the early 1800s, long before the first Model T rolled off the assembly line, before we started adding vast amounts of CO2 to the atmosphere. And if we look at sea level rise, the sea level is rising today at the same rate as it was 150 years ago. And glaciers are retreating at about the same pace as they were 150 years ago. Well, we're told we need to do something to face this rising temperature. Again, we've only increased temperature about 0.8 of a degree since 1900. And we'll probably continue to have this warming a little bit. What should we do? Accept the warmth and the more CO2, because we're seeing many, many benefits.
If you're like me, all this information is hard to process. So much of what we're hearing today is a completely opposite conclusion to what we hear every day when it comes to these climate change talking points. I'll admit there is an emotional component to this topic. Even though we have data that shows these environmental catastrophic events are not increasing, it still doesn't make it any easier when they happen. In our connected society, we can view more devastation and constant suffering than ever before. For me, and I would guess for many others, I can't see these images without asking myself, what can I do? How can I fix this problem of human suffering? So to be honest, if someone tells me that if we just stop using fossil fuels, or use more wind turbines, or put up solar panels, or buy electric vehicles, we will alleviate the suffering, well, who wouldn't be up for that? So let's direct our conversation there. What about the solutions and changes that we are undergoing to address climate change in our Western society?
I'm with a group called Friends of Science Society, located in Calgary. And we review climate issues, science issues, and we also report on policy issues.
I'd like to introduce King Gregory, a professional engineer from Calgary, Alberta. In December of 2021, Mr. Gregory released the first detailed paper discussing estimates of the cost for the United States to go to net zero carbon by 2050.
You might have heard the term net zero before. It's definitely presented as the prime objective when we talk about going green, and it's the path that currently the U.S. is aggressively pursuing. This is about to get technical, so hang with me as we try and break this concept down.
So net zero implies that we're going to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, that's mainly carbon dioxide, or CO2. That's mainly using wind and solar power to do that. So net zero means that we can still produce some greenhouse gases, but you're going to capture that amount to inject it. So the net amount that's released to the atmosphere, net of capture, would be zero. So I found hourly data for the US, and we analyzed the power requirements. We looked at what the total solar plus wind plus fossil fuel power generation is, and compared that to the total consumer demand for that energy. So we're looking now at the hourly difference now between the solar plus wind plus fossil fuel demand and the supply. So what I've done is I scaled up the amount of solar and wind power. It's all of the fossil fuel generated electricity. So we came up with a cost of about $290 trillion. So we came up with a cost of about $290 trillion. Now, just to put that in perspective, that's over 13 times the U.S. gross domestic product.
$290 trillion? That can't possibly be right. Where in the world is he getting these astronomical numbers?
The costs mainly come from government sources. Would have to evaluate the energy content of the various fossil fuels, the heat capacity, the efficiencies of cars and trucks for both electric and fossil fuels. Knowing the efficiencies of the batteries, we're assuming an 80% efficiency of the utility scale batteries.
And it goes on from there. If you look at the official study by King Gregory and the Friends of Science, you'll see the attention to detail is not lacking and way beyond the scope of the short time we have to examine every piece of data. But at least I can feel confident this $290 trillion wasn't just pulled out of a hat. But if that number is right, and that's the path we're on, is that even feasible for us to accomplish?
Is that feasible? Well, that's about $1.1 million for each adult in the United States. So just on that basis, no. But of course, when you ask feasible, well, you need to do a cost-benefit analysis in order to determine what's feasible. The leaders of the Western countries, and certainly the U.S., were not aware of the costs of going to net zero. They go to United Nations presentations where they're fed wrong information. Is because of the United Nations putting all their faith in climate models versus looking at studies using empirical evidence. The correct response is to do a proper cost-benefit analysis, and that needs to be done. It's never been done for this net zero craze.
As I continue to hear this, I begin wondering, why are we trying to go net zero again? And why have we chosen wind and solar as the great saviors of our planet when the numbers just don't add up? And I'm afraid to ask a very uncomfortable question in today's energy conversation. What's so bad about fossil fuels? Especially if CO2 emissions are beneficial rather than harmful. Why should we run away from this quote-unquote evil energy source?
Okay.
Get another swig.
Another swig.
I'd like to introduce Ronald Stein, the author of the Pulitzer Prize-nominated book, Clean Energy Exploitations. Mr. Stein is an engineer and the founder of PTS Advance, the largest specialist provider of technical talent in the United States. I wanted to know more about exactly what it will take to make these vast changes to our society and if there would be any unintended consequences.
What I want the average person to know about climate change is to be energy literate, to understand how we got here. Everybody wants to go to net zero. Well, we had a decarbonized society back in 1800s. There were no coal-fired power plants. The Beverly Hillbillies hadn't discovered oil yet, and life was hard, and people very seldom lived to 40, and they very seldom traveled 100 miles from where they were born. And the interesting thing is the world populated from 1 billion to 8 billion in less than 200 years. And it did that right after the discovery of oil. But you have to understand, it wasn't because of oil, because oil is useless, totally useless, unless you can manufacture it into something usable. And when it gets manufactured through refineries, we get oil derivatives that makes more than 6,000 products in our daily lives, and the fuels for the various transportation infrastructures. Those products didn't exist before 1900. Take a look in your house, your workplace, the hospital, and try and identify something that was not made with fossil fuels. Wind turbines and solar panels can only generate electricity. They can manufacture nothing for society. Everything needs electricity. It's made with fossil fuels. You get rid of fossil fuels, there'll be nothing to electrify. And so it's total misunderstanding of what renewable energy is. And I keep correcting people. It's not renewable energy, it's renewable electricity. Think about something no one else has thought about. Recycling. You know, these wind turbines and solar panels only last like 20 years, and there is no proven recycling yet. Australia and the UK, wind turbines are just toxic dumps. They just take the blades and put them in toxic dumps because they have no way to recycle them. I know what people do with their flashlight battery. They just take it, they throw it in the trash can. Well, you're going to need a couple guys, your neighbors, to get that 1,000-pound battery to put that in the trash can. It's only the wealthy countries that are really going green. We want to basically go green, and we want to basically feel good about it, but we tend to have blinders about what's happening to get us an EV, for example. All those developing countries where the exotic minerals and metals are being mined, the lithium and the cobalts and et cetera, for the EV batteries and the wind turbines and solar panels, these countries have no environmental controls. They've got no labor controls, and they're just exploiting the people to let us go green. So, one Tesla battery, you have to move 500,000 pounds of earth for all the different metals that you need. That's for one battery. I will not buy an EV. I will not buy an EV for ethical reasons, because I know where the lithium's coming from. Folks, and it can be mined in America. That is the dirtiest kind of mine you can have, lithium. It's strip mining. They thought coal mining was dirty. Coal mining is clean compared to lithium. It contaminates the water, contaminates the landscape. They don't have to decommission and bring the land back to its original format. Over there, if they mine for lithium and they run out of lithium, they just move on to the next site. And I'm not willing to financially support that environmental degradation and humanity atrocities.
We write a lot about energy poverty in the developing world. The World Bank now has cut off all funding for fossil fuel development in Africa and India. They're destining these people to generational poverty. We can solve that by providing electricity that is clean, abundant, affordable, and reliable. And that can include coal-fired electricity, using the best technology, so the only thing that comes out of those stacks are carbon dioxide and water vapor.
Picking a winner and loser and saying, well, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, that's going to solve everything. We're going to have a better world. We're going to get rid of all that emissions. You get rid of crude oil, we could lose a couple billion people. You have to understand there's 50,000 jets in the world. There's 50,000 merchant ships in the world. And now you need them today to keep these people alive. You're moving products and food all over the world. I'm a proponent. Let's get rid of oil. But before I jump out of that airplane without a parachute, show me what your replacement is so we can still have our iPhones and our medications in the hospitals. But I think the best thing we can do for the world is help develop the 6 billion people that are in poverty and try and bring them up to the lifestyle that we have. There is no silver bullet answer. There's to take a lot of everything to make it work. Just be energy literate, because you're picking winners and losers, and look at the unintended consequences. Someone's paying for it, or someone's being exploited to make you feel good.
So it's clear there is a true human cost for trying to save the planet. In some cases, I'd say we seem to be doing more harm than good. So why is the current mainstream opinion on climate change totally opposite of what we're hearing today? Each of these experts seem intelligent and credentialed. So what's the disconnect? Is this just a fringe minority way of thinking? What about the statistics we talked about at the beginning? Is this just the 3% of scientists who deny climate change that we're talking to today?
In my past, I've been on the board of directors of 2 international scientific organizations, having about, I think one was 6,000 members, the other 12,000 members. I've only run across one person that was included in that survey. It wasn't 97%, it changed with time.
Yes, there is a general perception that 97% of scientists agree on climate change, and this comes from a Doran and Zimmerman report in 2009. The question was, is human activity a significant cause of climate change? Now, of course, they didn't define what significant was. They didn't, of course, mention anything about climate change being dangerous. They didn't mention anything about greenhouse gases. They're just human activity. Well, of course, obviously, I would be in that group. I believe that humans have a warming effect. Certainly there's greenhouse gas that has an effect. Urban warming has an effect. Black soot on ice and snow has a warming effect in the Arctic. Even the most stringent climate skeptic, even if they think greenhouse gases have only a 5% effect, then they're counted, right, in the 97%. In other words, it's garbage, right? There is no 97% consensus. There is a wide range of opinions.
I believe that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and causes some warming. But yet, I would be included in their definition of the 97%. We looked at it and looked at the exact same data that they published, and less than 1% of the scientists they interviewed agreed that man-made driven warming would lead to catastrophic events.
And that's the crux of the matter right there. The whole issue comes down to my data versus your data argument. Who's got it right and who's got it wrong? So that leads me to ask, what is the reaction when these experts have presented their data, especially by those in the scientific community who disagree?
There are extremely few debates. Almost all the climate skeptics invite the, what do we call them, alarmists. It's extremely difficult to get them to debate.
Scientific effort requires dialogue. A lot of people around the coffee clutch, talk one way, but they're quiet when all this comes up. They're just afraid to stand out.
If you're a university professor, you have to toe the line or you won't get the funding. We know that for a fact. We've had a recent professor, PhD, I won't go into any more specifics. He was up for tenure and he wanted to join our now over 100 group of scientists and experts on climate change at the CO2 Coalition. And our advice to him was, don't do it. If you join us, you won't get tenure. You'll probably be fired. You'll definitely lose your funding. Get your tenure and then come and talk to us.
I attempted to get some articles published in a paper. I had to pay to get it published as an ad, because otherwise, of course, it would be impossible. It was in 3 parts. They did publish the first 2 parts, and then I was informed that they were going to break the contract and not publish the last one because they had negative comments on Twitter.
It's this danger that we've seen it with Dr. Peter Ridd, a member of ours from Australia. He told the truth about the Great Barrier Reef and how it's thriving. and was fired because of it. We saw it from Susan Crockford, polar bear expert, who told the truth about polar bears and how they're thriving and prospering. She was fired from her university position for telling the truth. And then we see these people, you need to toe the company line and promote this 97% consensus. You need to promote catastrophic, man-made warming in everything you do. And it frustrates me to no end.
It should be people throw something out for public debate and other people, well, I don't know about, what do you think about that? Or I should be able to get up and talk to some guy in public where he's accountable to other peers for his statements.
The scientific method appears to have been abandoned. It used to be that we should welcome challenges to theories. It doesn't take a 97% consensus. It takes one person, one scientist, to show the evidence against something. Science used to be a debate, and a welcome debate among scientists. We'll work it out, point out the flaws of the argument that someone's making, and then we'll better that and use something that works.
We've had so much propaganda pushed on us, it's beginning to have an effect on our society.
So where do we go from here? I think there's the potential to see these views on climate as passive or even irresponsible. Sure, there's disagreement on whether polar ice melt is a good thing or a bad thing. But what about the clear things we can point to, such as pollution? Surely this can't be viewed as positive for our planet. So my last question is, what should we be doing to help our planet be a better place for the future?
We are all conservationists and environmentalists. All of us are. We want to leave a clean environment. We want to do better. Instead of wastefully spending trillions of dollars on a non-existent problem, let's focus on the things that really are occurring that are bad. And one of the things I focus on a lot are the invasive species. We see it along the East Coast with Japanese stiltgrass invading most of our mountain areas and wiping out all of the undergrowth in most of our mountain areas. In the West, cheatgrass has completely dominated many of the areas and wiped out native grasses. And it's the cheatgrass that's now leading to many of the fires. A lot of these are grass fires with this cheatgrass that's burning. Rather than doing something, let's stop doing stupid things. Let's stop this road to ruin by embracing the net zero. Let's stop reining in industries. And let's open up our country and the world to development of what's needed.
We should all be good stewards of the earth and try to not waste things. I think we're getting way too radical on the direction we're going. That's all.
That climate has always been changing. We've had a great deal of climate change in the past, and there's no reason to expect that those effects won't continue. Yes, greenhouse gases do have a warming effect, but it's far less than what you've been told. And to not discuss the great benefit of CO2 fertilization in terms of increasing crop yields and the overall greening of the earth. The benefits of CO2 on agriculture alone is 76 times greater than the harmful effects of storms and sea level rise. The bottom line is that the emissions in total are net beneficial.
It's more CO2 that will help us feed the world. It's more CO2 that's causing deserts to shrink, not expand. It's more CO2 that are causing forestation and reforestation.
I think humanity is such a small piece of the world. It's an analogy. I don't know if you can use this or not, but you know, if you see someone walk in the ocean and you know they're basically urinating in the ocean, and you start screaming out, "He's changing the temperature of the ocean." It ain't gonna happen.
If you look at the EPA website, Google EPA and pollution, and look at their charts showing all of the major pollutants are at significantly lower levels today, and we're getting better year after year. So our air and our water today are probably cleaner than they've been since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Look back 40 or 50 years, Lake Erie was dead. Now they're holding world-class fishing tournaments there. The three rivers of Pittsburgh were so polluted, nothing lived in it. And again, now they're holding Bassmaster bass tournaments in the waters of Pittsburgh. We see this time and time again with our water and our air cleaner than they've been, and probably again since the Industrial Revolution. And that's a good thing. We should continue doing that. I love my grandchildren. I want to leave a better world for them. But we also need to leave a world for our grandchildren that's economically thriving as well. I want my children to have reliable, abundant, affordable energy and live in an environmentally friendly world. And we can have all of those things coexist.
If I had to summarize everything, I would bring it back to context. Context brings everything into perspective with the changes we are observing on our planet. But why the deception? Why are we not being told the full story from the mainstream voices? Why are we told that there is broad consensus when we have seen scientific evidence today that shows the opposite? I want to bring us back to a place of unity once again. We all desire a planet that is healthy and will yield an atmosphere of consistent human flourishing for the future. Are the changes we are viewing today an omen for disaster? Or just a small blip on a very long trend that has cycled many times before? And for the United States, are the current solutions that are being proposed actually so foolproof, especially when they could consume up to 70% of our GDP for the next 28 years? For some of you, I realize this documentary challenges very personally held beliefs. But we are not here to shout propaganda and simple political slogans. You deserve the whole truth. This data presented to you is not with pride, but with humility. We want to offer an invitation for you to examine the evidence for yourself. Thank you for your time, and thank you for watching.
Are you guys ready for the quiz?
You are watching A Climate Conversation. To order your DVD and Blu-ray copy